You have brought eternal shame upon this house.
You are a disgrace to your
Name and everything we stand for.
It began with a voice raised too high for courtesy and too sharp for forgiveness, a sound that split the air of polite expectation and left a young woman standing alone in the weight of it. Shame, when spoken aloud, becomes a public sentence, and she felt it pass over her name as if pronounced by a judge who never looked at her face. She had learned, long ago, to endure such moments with stillness, yet this one struck deeper, because it came from the man appointed to guard her fate. He called her ungrateful. He called her careless. He reminded all present that her comfort was not her own, that her future depended upon his goodwill, and that goodwill, he implied, was a fragile thing. Each word was measured to wound without seeming cruel, to punish without appearing improper. She answered none of it. Silence was her only shield, and she held it with the discipline of someone taught that survival often requires restraint rather than truth. She had once possessed a family name spoken with warmth. Now she possessed usefulness. As a lady's companion, she moved through rooms as a necessity rather than a choice, valued for discretion and education, tolerated for gentleness, dismissed for lack of fortune. Her guardian never let her forget the transaction. He had rescued her from obscurity, he insisted, and rescue, in his telling, demanded obedience beyond gratitude. Tonight, he demanded more, submission before witnesses. The accusation concerned inheritance, a delicate word that carries both promise and threat. He suggested impropriety without naming it, carelessness without evidence, ambition without apology. The unspoken meaning was clear enough. If she were judged wanting, he would remain master of her prospects. If she bowed, he would forgive. If she resisted, he would remind her how easily protection may become punishment. When he lifted his hand, the motion itself was restrained, almost elegant, yet it carried a history of authority that pressed upon her chest. He did not strike. He did not need to. The suggestion alone was sufficient to remind her that her body, like her future, was not entirely her own. She lowered her eyes, not in surrender, but in self-command, holding herself together by will alone. Around her, others listened. No one spoke. Polite society excels at attention without intervention, at witnessing without responsibility. She felt their judgment not as hostility, but as absence, and it hurt all the same. Dignity, she knew, was something one defended alone, or not at all. Her guardian's voice softened then, turning almost reasonable, as if offering mercy. He advised her to remember her place. He warned her against ingratitude. He smiled, a thin expression meant to appear kind. The sound of his approval, conditional and cold, was more frightening than his anger. She wondered, briefly, how many years might pass before she ceased to feel this familiar tightening in her throat. She thought of her mother, long gone, who had taught her that a woman's worth was not measured by the temper of the man who claimed authority over her. She thought of the books she loved, the quiet hours stolen for learning, the belief that education might one day secure freedom. These thoughts steadied her. If she were to be undone, she would not be undone loudly. Then something shifted. Not in her, but in the room. The guardian paused, perhaps sensing that the power he enjoyed had reached its natural limit. A presence asserted itself without noise, a stillness that pressed back against cruelty. It was not anger that interrupted the moment, but composure. A man spoke her guardian's name with careful emphasis, as one might address an equal while declining his behavior. The voice was calm, unmistakably assured, shaped by habit rather than impulse. It did not accuse. It inquired. In that inquiry lay authority, and in that authority lay protection she had not known to expect. The speaker identified himself only by courtesy, yet the effect was immediate. Her guardian's certainty faltered, his command dissolving into explanation. The voice continued, speaking of duty, of responsibility owed to those under one's charge, of the limits of acceptable conduct. Each phrase was precise, chosen to remind rather than to threaten. It was a rebuke delivered as instruction. She did not look up at once. Hope, when it arrives unexpectedly, can be dangerous. Yet she listened, and in listening felt something unfamiliar, relief unaccompanied by fear. The man offered no apology on her behalf. He required none. He spoke as though her dignity were assumed, not debated. The guardian attempted a defense, invoking custom and concern, but the calm voice answered with fact. There were records, it said. There were obligations unmet. There were questions better addressed privately, by those empowered to resolve them. The implication was clear. This was no idle observer, but someone accustomed to action. At last, she lifted her gaze. She did not yet see the man clearly, but she understood what he represented. Authority aligned with restraint. Power tempered by principle. For the first time that evening, the balance shifted, and she stood no longer as a spectacle, but as a person reclaimed from it. The voice concluded with an offer framed as propriety itself, that she be allowed distance from the present conflict, that her welfare be considered without pressure, that matters of guardianship be reviewed according to law rather than temper. It was an offer that sounded like inevitability. Her guardian fell silent. The room breathed again. She felt the weight upon her chest ease, though the future remained uncertain. As she steadied herself, the calm voice addressed her directly, not as a dependent, but as a gentlewoman, and in that moment she understood that the man who had intervened was a duke, and that nothing would remain as it had been. Whether salvation or new trial awaited her, she could not yet know, only that his presence altered destiny, and the night held its breath in sudden suspense. It began again with consequence, not relief, because rescue in society often breeds suspicion sharper than open cruelty and judgment. Whispers followed her departure, clinging like debt, transforming gratitude into rumor, protection into provocation, kindness into a spectacle for all. She understood tragedy differently now, as survival that costs comfort, safety purchased through uncertainty, dignity balanced upon strangers' decisions alone. The Duke's intervention ended nothing, it merely rearranged power, shifting attention from her silence to his intent and public consequence. She left under escort, not as a guest, but as a question carried carefully beyond the room by polite strangers. Carriage wheels never sounded, yet movement pressed upon her thoughts, each mile imagined as judgment rather than distance or mercy. The Duke spoke little, allowing space where her fear might settle without command or interrogation from him, tonight, deliberately offered. Silence between them felt intentional, not neglectful, a courtesy extended by one accustomed to power restrained through habit, honor, alone. She studied restraint in him, recognizing its cost, sensing battles previously fought without witnesses or applause within guarded public lives. At last he spoke, addressing her formally, acknowledging harm done without dramatizing it for sympathy or spectacle, ever, again, tonight. He offered protection as procedure, not favor, describing legal review, education, and independence with precise calm measured, careful, unwavering, resolve. Such clarity unsettled her more than cruelty, because it implied permanence rather than temporary rescue or theatrical, noble, impulse, alone. She answered carefully, grateful yet guarded, aware that acceptance would redraw her entire future and invite relentless examination from society. He inclined his head, respecting hesitation, remarking that consent, freely given, mattered above appearances or advantage, ambition, or rumor, alone. Her guardian responded swiftly, wounded pride masquerading as concern, accusing the Duke of impropriety and undue interest, loudly, publicly, again. The accusation ignited gossip instantly, a fire fed by boredom and class anxiety within the assembled, listening, watching, judging, crowd. The Duke did not retreat, he clarified boundaries, naming guardianship abuse without embellishment or insult to anyone present there, tonight. His refusal to dramatize truth made it heavier, impossible to dismiss as performance or romantic, fantasy, staged, diversion, distraction, alone. She felt herself shifting internally, from object discussed to witness of her own defense and emerging, dignity, slowly, restored, again. Gratitude stirred, dangerous and bright, threatening dependence she feared more than neglect or abandonment, poverty, disgrace, invisibility, alone, forever, again. The Duke sensed caution, assuring her that protection would never demand silence or obedience beyond law, conscience, fairness, respect, freely. Such words startled her, because they offered agency instead of shelter or concealment, charity, control, obligation, dependency, submission, fear, alone. Agreement was reached quietly, yet its implications thundered through her thoughts relentlessly as whispers, judgments, rumors, speculations, followed, closely, behind. When she departed, she felt watched anew, not with contempt, but curiosity sharpened into expectation and risk, mingled, together, dangerously. The Duke remained composed, yet inwardly resolved, aware that intervention now demanded completion through consequence, sacrifice, scrutiny, resistance, persistence, honor. He understood society's appetite, how kindness invites suspicion when power crosses prescribed boundaries of class, gender, wealth, expectation, tradition, control. Still, retreat would confirm cruelty's reign, and he refused complicity through silence or polite avoidance, cowardice, sanctioned, neglect, again, ever. For her, night brought neither sleep nor tears, only reckoning with altered possibilities and fragile, hope, awakening, slowly, painfully, inside. She questioned motive, fearing benevolence hides expectation, yet evidence contradicted cynicism persistently through action, restraint, consistency, respect, patience, honesty, shown. The guardian plodded quietly, humiliated but unbroken, determined to reclaim authority through rumor and manipulation, influence, pressure, leverage, tradition, again. He underestimated the Duke's patience, mistaking courtesy for weakness fatally and misunderstanding, honor, resolve, preparation, foresight, discipline, endurance, strategy, entirely. Days later, the first scandal surfaced, subtle yet poisonous, questioning her virtue indirectly through implication, insinuation, suggestion, whisper, repetition, alone. She felt it sting before hearing words, sensing doors hesitate before opening and smiles, falter, politely, carefully, around her, again. The Duke acknowledged the attack calmly, promising response through truth, not retaliation or spectacle, cruelty, vengeance, domination, humiliation, tactics, alone. His steadiness unsettled her heart, awakening trust she scarcely allowed herself to imagine, feel, accept, nurture, protect, cherish, openly, before. Yet trust invited risk, and risk sharpened fear into vigilance within her, quietly, constantly, attentively, watchful, prepared, guarded, resolved, always. Movement continued, invisible yet decisive, as papers shifted and authority prepared to change hands by law, reason, duty, conscience, resolve. She stood between past submission and future agency, trembling yet upright within borrowed courage, growing, uncertain, fragile, persistent, hopeful, still. The Duke watched carefully, not possessively, understanding that protection must empower rather than confine, silence, limit, bind, diminish, control, dominate. Their alliance remained unspoken, defined by action rather than promise or declaration, performance, sentiment, display, romance, assurance, oath, confession, pledge. Society waited hungrily, expecting collapse, scandal, or compromise between duty, morality, reputation, class, power, desire, fear, tradition, consequence, judgment, spectacle. Instead, resolve hardened quietly, shaping outcomes beyond gossip's reach through patience, law, character, intention, restraint, consistency, planning, integrity, persistence, time. She sensed something irrevocable beginning, though its shape remained unclear within circumstance, destiny, choice, courage, endurance, honor, sacrifice, change, approaching. The Duke prepared correspondence, formal and decisive, sealing confrontation's next stage through evidence, law, testimony, exposure, consequence, truth, patience, resolve. She awaited instruction, yet insisted upon understanding, refusing blind obedience now or silence, submission, erasure, fear, compliance, weakness, again, ever. He welcomed questions, explaining rights patiently, reinforcing her autonomy deliberately through clarity, education, respect, transparency, encouragement, equality, fairness, acknowledgement, trust. Confidence returned gradually, cautious but undeniable, lighting her voice softly with conviction, steadiness, warmth, intelligence, dignity, resolve, courage, grace, presence. Yet danger lingered, for those losing power seldom retreat gracefully or quietly, peacefully, honorably, without resistance, malice, desperation, cunning, calculation. A letter arrived, unsigned, threatening exposure of fabricated sins intended to shame, destroy, isolate, discredit, silence, weaken, control, intimidate her. She read it steadily, then sought the Duke, knowing escalation had begun, and the battle for dignity, truth, future, now. It began with loss articulated as choice, because tragedy often disguises itself as reasoned necessity rather than cruelty. She arrived carrying the unsigned letter like a verdict already rendered, its threats echoing older condemnations she had survived. Words accused her of crimes never committed, yet promised exposure as certainty, not possibility. Fear pressed inward, disciplined by years of restraint, while resolve struggled for breath. She understood now that protection invites escalation, that dignity provokes those who profit from silence. Seeking the Duke was not retreat but confrontation, an admission that her future required witness, truth, and shared courage against ruin. He listened without interruption, receiving the letter as evidence rather than spectacle, and this steadiness unsettled her practiced defenses. When she confessed fear, it emerged controlled yet raw, shaped by humiliation endured and threats renewed. She expected reassurance, instead he offered acknowledgement, naming danger honestly without softening consequence. Such candor felt bracing, almost painful, yet strangely kind. He explained the law patiently, how lies fracture under scrutiny, how guardianship could be transferred, how truth survives when protected by process. Her relief arrived cautiously, tempered by understanding that justice demands endurance, patience, and courage equal to malice from all involved present. Her confession deepened, moving beyond fear toward truth she seldom voiced aloud. She spoke of dependence, of gratitude weaponized, of nights rehearsing obedience as safety. He did not interrupt, though restraint cost him visible effort measured in breath and stillness. When she finished, silence held, not empty but deliberate. He admitted his own burden, duty shaped by lineage and expectation, mistakes paid privately to preserve public order. Protection, he said, must never replace freedom. Partnership, however limited, required consent renewed daily. The word partnership startled her, igniting cautious hope tempered by discipline. It felt radical, dangerous, necessary, earned today alone. Action followed confession, transforming understanding into movement shaped by care. He drafted letters seeking testimony, requesting records, asserting lawful review without flourish. She assisted, not as subject but participant, learning names, dates, facts that reframed memory as evidence. Each detail steadied her, replacing helpless recollection with structured purpose. Yet doubt lingered, whispering that exposure might stain her regardless of outcome. He acknowledged this risk without minimizing it, promising presence rather than rescue. Should truth fail, he would stand beside her publicly. The promise carried weight precisely because it avoided romance, remaining ethical, restrained, binding in intent and consequence alone together. Days compressed into resolve, and pressure intensified through polite resistance rather than force. Invitations cooled. Replies delayed. Courtesy masked exclusion. She felt the familiar ache of erasure returning, threatening progress. He counseled patience, reminding her that momentum often appears as stagnation before change. Together they reviewed the anonymous letter, tracing language to its source through habit and spite. Recognition dawned quietly, sharpening stakes. Her guardian sought not reconciliation but destruction. Naming this truth hurt, yet clarified choices. She chose forward motion despite cost. The decision marked growth, transforming endurance into agency, fear into deliberate risk accepted without illusions or hesitation. With agency came vulnerability, and vulnerability demanded trust tested daily. She questioned him directly, asking whether duty concealed interest or ambition disguised charity. He answered without offense, admitting regard yet refusing entitlement. Respect, he said, precedes affection or corrupts it. Such boundaries steadied her, allowing warmth without surrender. They spoke more freely, though never carelessly, sharing values shaped by loss and restraint. The alliance matured into mutual reliance, professional yet intimate. Society misread this balance, predicting scandal where discipline prevailed. Their quiet accord grew stronger precisely because it resisted interpretation, thriving on integrity rather than display amid mounting scrutiny everywhere. Opposition sharpened unexpectedly when a formal complaint surfaced, questioning the Duke's propriety in assuming oversight. The challenge struck her hardest, fearing she had become liability rather than cause. He reassured her with transparency, sharing correspondence and strategy, refusing secrecy that breeds mistrust. This openness strengthened her resolve, yet consequences loomed. If he withdrew, she would stand exposed. If he persisted, his reputation risked fracture. She insisted on proceeding, refusing to be shield or excuse. Choice reclaimed her voice. The conflict evolved from rescue to partnership, redefining stakes beyond protection toward shared accountability and courage amid institutional scrutiny and pressure alone. Her guardian's response arrived as calculated cruelty, distributing half-truths that implied impropriety without proof. The method was familiar, exploiting doubt's persistence even after refutation. She felt old wounds reopen, yet responded differently now. Instead of retreat, she documented, preserved, and prepared. He supported this discipline, praising resilience without sentimentalizing pain. Together they assembled a record that transformed rumor into liability. The shift empowered her, revealing that survival could become strategy. Still, nights remained difficult, haunted by consequences beyond control. Courage, she learned, coexists with fear, advancing not despite it but alongside deliberately, patiently, ethically, publicly, steadily until outcomes emerged clearer. A meeting was scheduled, promising resolution through formal review, and anticipation tightened her composure. She prepared statements carefully, balancing honesty with restraint, determined not to beg. He reminded her that credibility grows through calm persistence. On the eve, doubt surged, whispering that truth might still fail against influence. He countered quietly, noting that integrity accumulates interest over time. Their exchange held gravity, not romance, yet intimacy deepened through shared risk. She recognized affection forming, disciplined, and respectful. The realization frightened her, because attachment raises stakes. Tomorrow would test everything built between them, including reputations, futures, principles, trust publicly scrutinized severely. Morning approached heavy with consequence, and she resolved to meet it unflinching. The Duke prepared beside her, composed yet alert, embodying steadiness she now shared. When new information arrived unexpectedly, confirming authorship of the anonymous threats, shock yielded to clarity. The Guardian's hand was proven, unmistakable, deliberate. Justice now possessed direction, though not certainty. Relief mingled with apprehension, because exposure invites retaliation. She met the Duke's gaze, understanding escalation was inevitable. This revelation did not end danger, it sharpened it. The next step would demand public confrontation, and neither could retreat without surrendering everything earned to date together. So FAR.IT began with exposure poised like a blade, because tragedy sharpens when truth prepares to speak aloud. The meeting convened not for comfort but reckoning, and she entered carrying composure like armor forged through suffering. Her guardian arrived confident, mistaking noise for authority and familiarity for immunity. The Duke stood neither beside nor above her, but aligned through principle alone. Silence weighed heavily, demanding courage rather than speech. She felt history narrowing, all former humiliations pressing toward this instant. When proceedings opened, civility framed hostility carefully, and every courtesy masked consequence. Nothing promised mercy, everything demanded clarity, endurance, and resolve. Her guardian spoke first, draping accusation in concern, rehearsed outrage in measured tones. He cited sacrifice, obligation, and reputation, reshaping abuse into stewardship before attentive ears. She listened without interruption, refusing surrender yet denying spectacle. When invited to respond, she chose restraint, stating facts plainly, declining embellishment or defense of character. The Duke then addressed the assembly, not condemning but correcting, introducing documents that dismantled authority quietly. Each revelation landed without flourish, and certainty replaced bluster. Power shifted perceptibly, not through volume but verification. The Guardian faltered, realizing history no longer answered to his voice. Alone, he confronted irreversible loss. Anger surfaced then, stripped of civility, as the Guardian challenged motive and honor openly. He accused the Duke of manipulation, ambition, impropriety, wielding suspicion as weapon. Murmurs threatened momentum, yet the Duke responded with restraint, asserting accountability rather than desire. He clarified boundaries again, emphasizing consent, independence, and lawful obligation. She watched him carefully, recognizing courage that refused drama. When questioned directly, she affirmed her choice to seek protection, not privilege. Speaking steadied her, transforming fear into presence. The room adjusted accordingly, acknowledging agency where dependency once defined her standing. Consequence approached, heavy but deserved. Justice waited, patient, impartial, unavoidable. Afterward, resolution remained incomplete, suspended between verdict and retaliation. She felt relief tempered by dread, aware that exposure provokes desperation. The Duke warned quietly that power rarely concedes without resistance. Preparations intensified, not theatrical but thorough, anticipating countermoves shaped by spite. She participated fully, reviewing statements, rehearsing calm responses, refusing emotional excess. This discipline marked her transformation from ward to witness. Trust between them deepened, not romanticized, but forged through shared responsibility. Yet affection stirred beneath formality, unsettling in its gentleness. She feared its cost. He acknowledged the risk silently, choosing honor over retreat despite looming consequence. Certain, irrevocable, approaching. The Guardian struck back swiftly, filing objections meant to delay and exhaust. Each challenge questioned procedure, not truth, hoping time would erode resolve. She wavered briefly, fatigue pressing old habits forward. The Duke countered methodically, dismantling obstruction with patience learned from governance. He reminded her that endurance often defeats cruelty. Strength returned, quieter but firmer. Together they refused provocation, denying satisfaction to malice. Their composure became strategy, unsettling opponents accustomed to chaos. Still, danger sharpened. Retaliation threatened not only reputation but security. She recognized the cost of standing visible. Retreat beckoned temptingly, yet she remained. Resolved, alert, unyielding, prepared, present. Pressure intensified as allies withdrew, fearing association with controversy. Invitations vanished entirely, leaving isolation sharp and instructive. She mourned quietly, releasing illusions about belonging. The Duke acknowledged losses frankly, sharing consequences borne throughout his life. This admission equalized them, bridging rank through vulnerability. Their conversations deepened, grounded in ethics rather than comfort. She found herself speaking with confidence once buried, articulating values shaped by hardship. He listened attentively, learning from her resilience. Mutual regard matured into affection disciplined by circumstance. Neither confessed desire. Silence preserved focus. Yet hearts adjusted, aligning subtly despite deliberate restraint maintained carefully. Against mounting external opposition. Resolution neared through formal summons requiring final testimony. Anticipation unsettled her composure again, awakening vulnerability she accepted rather than denied. The Duke prepared her carefully, emphasizing truth without defensiveness. She practiced statements until they felt owned rather than borrowed. Night brought reflection, not panic. She acknowledged affection privately, deciding it would not dictate action. Duty came first. At dawn, correspondence arrived confirming attendance of influential witnesses. Relief mingled with fear, because exposure expands impact. Victory might vindicate yet transform everything. She understood now that justice carries consequence beyond personal survival. The path forward promised change, irreversible, demanding courage anew again. The final exchange before testimony carried weight heavier than ceremony. She thanked him formally, then stopped, choosing honesty instead. Gratitude shifted into respect, respect into something quieter and profound. He received this without claim, answering that her courage honored them both. They parted briefly, aware separation might redefine proximity forever. Uncertainty lingered, sharpened by anticipation. When news arrived that the guardian intended dramatic confrontation, escalation felt inevitable. She steadied herself, recalling every lesson learned. This moment required presence, not fear. As doors metaphorically closed behind preparation, she stepped forward internally, knowing confrontation would demand everything she had become thereafter alone. Silence followed preparation, thick with implication rather than calm. She waited, reflecting on the girl once disciplined into invisibility. That version receded, replaced by someone deliberate, accountable, awake. The Duke's influence remained steady, yet her strength now originated within. This realization fortified her against dependence. Whatever outcome awaited, she would not return to submission. The conflict had reshaped identity as much as circumstance. When footsteps metaphorically approached the threshold of decision, she welcomed consequence. Courage settled, quiet and immovable. She was no longer protected merely by another's authority, but by her own truth, prepared for judgment publicly, irrevocably, soon, now. Then the message arrived, brief and devastating in implication, confirming the guardian's final strategy. He intended not defense but spectacle, planning accusation before the highest audience possible. The risk escalated beyond procedure into legacy. She absorbed this calmly, recognizing the pattern of cruelty exposed fully at last. The Duke read alongside her, expression controlled, resolve unmistakable. Neither spoke immediately. What followed would demand public declaration, sacrifice, and unwavering unity. Retreat ended here. As consequence loomed larger than fear, she felt strangely ready. The coming confrontation would test honor itself, and love, unspoken yet present, would no longer remain safely unnamed. It began with truth spoken aloud, because tragedy loses its power when named before witnesses. She stood steady as accusation unfolded theatrically, the guardian's final attempt collapsing beneath its own excess. His voice rose, then fractured, exposed by documents and testimony that refused distortion. Silence answered him, not sympathetic but conclusive. Authority shifted irrevocably. Judgment followed without spectacle, restoring what cruelty had tried to erase. Relief reached her slowly, like breath returning after restraint. She remained composed, knowing vindication still demanded humility. Afterward, consequence settled with surprising gentleness. Society adjusted, not out of kindness, but inevitability. Apologies arrived indirectly, couched in politeness rather than remorse. She accepted none eagerly, yet bitterness found no home within her. Survival had refined her, not hardened her. The guardian's power dissolved formally, guardianship transferred beyond his reach. Justice proved imperfect but sufficient. Freedom, newly earned, felt unfamiliar, requiring adjustment. She stood independent for the first time, neither hidden nor protected, accountable to herself alone. The Duke approached then, careful not to claim victory as possession. He congratulated her courage, acknowledging cost rather than triumph. Gratitude passed between them quietly, mutual and measured. Their bond, forged under pressure, now faced transformation. Without danger, purpose shifted. She questioned whether connection would endure absent necessity. He seemed to consider the same, offering space rather than assumption. Respect deepened through restraint. Choice replaced obligation. This transition felt more vulnerable than crisis, demanding honesty without urgency's disguise. They spoke plainly, finally permitting emotion shaped by discipline. He admitted affection grown through admiration, never expectation. She confessed regard tempered by fear of imbalance. They negotiated equality deliberately, defining boundaries with care. Love, they agreed, must never echo rescue. Commitment, if offered, would be mutual, visible, patient. The conversation steadied them both, transforming intimacy into intention. No promises rushed ahead of readiness. Instead, possibility opened gently, inviting time to decide without pressure or performance. Days passed differently now, quieter yet fuller. She resumed study, refining skills once hidden. Independence demanded competence, and she embraced effort eagerly. The Duke remained present without intrusion, offering counsel only when requested. Their correspondence balanced warmth and propriety, building trust through consistency. Society observed cautiously, uncertain how to interpret restraint. Rumor faded gradually, starved of novelty. Reputation rebuilt not through defense but dignity sustained. She learned that stability could be earned daily, rather than defended perpetually. Yet transition tested her more than conflict had done. Freedom required decisions once made for her, and choice carried weight. She navigated finances, correspondence, and obligations with care, learning through effort rather than guidance. Confidence grew incrementally, shaped by mistakes survived rather than avoided. The Duke watched without interference, respecting her independence even when instinct urged assistance. This restraint strengthened affection, grounding it in equality rather than gratitude. Their dynamic matured through patience, revealing compatibility beyond circumstance. Eventually, clarity arrived through simplicity rather than drama. The Duke proposed not in spectacle but certainty, asking partnership rather than submission. He outlined shared values, responsibilities, and respect. She listened carefully, weighing freedom against companionship. Choosing did not feel like surrender. It felt like recognition. She accepted with calm conviction, confident in her agency. The decision honored her growth rather than negating it. Joy arrived quietly, profound yet contained, shaped by gratitude rather than relief. Their union altered perception subtly, demonstrating that honor could prevail without dominance. Society adapted again, accepting precedent after resistance. She retained autonomy, managing her affairs openly. Marriage became expansion, not enclosure. Together they cultivated balance, preserving individuality within commitment. Love matured through shared purpose, not possession. Past wounds informed compassion, not control. The future promised steadiness rather than spectacle, happiness earned through patience and principle. Yet even contentment required vigilance. They remembered how easily silence enables cruelty. She resolved never to withdraw her voice again. He pledged to listen, not protectively but respectfully. Their partnership embodied progress shaped by memory. Happiness did not erase tragedy, it contextualized it. The world remained imperfect, but they faced it aligned. When challenges arose, they would meet them openly, fortified by trust and equality. It ended not with triumph but continuation, because endings disguise beginnings in gentler language. She looked forward without forgetting, grounded by experience rather than fear. Love stood beside her, chosen freely, sustained deliberately. The past no longer dictated her posture. As they stepped into shared life, she understood that dignity once reclaimed becomes unassailable, and no raised hand, no public shame, could ever reach her again.